The clinking of heavy, lead crystal goblets and the soft, unassuming hum of a string quartet should have been the soundtrack to my ultimate triumph. We were seated in the private dining alcove of Laura, the most exclusive, fiercely gate-kept restaurant in the city, a place where the mahogany walls seemed to absorb the whispers of the elite, and the ambient lighting was specifically calibrated to make the wealthy look invincible. I had reserved this table 6 months in advance. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of survival, a testament to 40 years of relentless, bone-grinding work. Today, at exactly 9 a.m., the notification had chimed on my encrypted banking app. My pension, a massive, heavily negotiated corporate buyout from a multinational firm I had helped build from the ground up, had finally cleared. I was officially retired. I was officially free. And, unbeknownst to the 2 people sitting across from me, I was officially a woman with an 8-figure liquid net worth. But my daughter-in-law, Chloe, didn't know about the 8 figures. Chloe, with her sharply contoured cheekbones, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails tapping impatiently against the starched white linen tablecloth, and her eyes that always seemed to be calculating the exact resale value of everything in the room, thought I was just a tired, worn-out, middle-class administrator who had finally received a modest state pension. She thought I was vulnerable. She thought I was lonely. Above all, she thought I was an easy mark. "I don't think you're hearing me, Eleanor," Chloe said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sweetness usually reserved for speaking to a slow, disobedient child. She leaned forward, the harsh scent of her overpriced, overpowering designer perfume momentarily masking the delicate aroma of the truffle risotto sitting untouched on my plate. "I am not asking for a favor. I am stating a new reality. The cost of living has gone up. Leo's private kindergarten is demanding higher tuition. And, quite frankly, David and I need to upgrade our lifestyle to reflect his new position. So, starting tomorrow, you will direct deposit $3,000 into our joint account on the 1st of every single month." I blinked, my face a carefully constructed mask of absolute stillness. I let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, across the table. I looked past Chloe's smug, Botox-smoothed forehead to the far corner of the private alcove. There, sitting on a velvet settee, was my 5-year-old grandson, Leo. He was happily, innocently running a small die-cast fire truck along the edge of the polished baseboards, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother was currently using him as a bargaining chip in an extortion plot. My heart physically ached at the sight of him. He had my late husband's bright, intelligent eyes, and the laugh that could cure the darkest of days. Chloe knew exactly what Leo meant to me. She knew he was the only pulse left in my weary heart. And she was weaponizing that love with the precision of a sociopath. $3,000 a month, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper, perfectly steady, betraying absolutely none of the torrential hurricane of rage that was suddenly brewing in my chest. "Exactly," Chloe smiled, a thin, predatory stretching of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. She picked up her crystal wine glass, taking a slow, arrogant sip of the $200 Cabernet I was paying for. "And if you don't? If you decide to be selfish with that little pension you just got? Well," she placed the glass down, the sharp clink echoing like a gavel striking wood, "then you will never see Leo again. Not on birthdays, not on Christmas. I will block your number. I will ban you from our property, and I will tell him his grandmother moved away because she simply didn't care about him enough to help his family." The sheer audacity of the threat hung in the air, a toxic, invisible gas filling the luxurious room. I slowly shifted my gaze to my son David, my flesh and blood, the boy I had carried, The boy I had worked 60-hour weeks to put through college after his father passed away. He was sitting next to Chloe, staring intently at the silver oyster fork next to his plate. His shoulders were hunched, his spine curved in an agonizing display of absolute cowardice. He didn't look up. He didn't defend me. He just nervously adjusted the cuffs of the custom Italian wool suit I had bought him for his last birthday. In that singular, microscopic moment, my son died to me. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a hollow, pathetic shell of a man who had completely surrendered his dignity to a venomous parasite. For years, I had played the role of the silent, accommodating matriarch. I had absorbed Chloe's backhanded compliments about my modest home. I had paid off their credit cards when they mysteriously fell behind, despite David making a lucrative salary. I had swallowed my pride, bitten my tongue, and smiled through the disrespect. All because I was terrified of exactly what she was threatening right now: losing access to my grandson. Society had conditioned me to believe that a grandmother's love meant infinite sacrifice, infinite patience, and infinite submission to the whims of the younger generation. They thought they had backed a weak, desperate, lonely old woman into a corner. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a monster who had suddenly decided to stop playing nice. I didn't cry. I didn't reach across the table to beg or plead for mercy. I didn't try to reason with an unreasonable tyrant. And I certainly didn't look to my spineless son for salvation. Instead, a deep, profound, and utterly terrifying sense of calm washed over my entire body. The warm, fuzzy blanket of maternal instinct evaporated in a fraction of a second, replaced by the cold, calculating, ruthless instincts of the corporate titan I had been in my secret professional life. I reached for my black leather handbag sitting on the empty chair beside me. The movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered. Chloe's smug smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a tiny flicker of confusion crossing her eyes. She had expected tears. She had expected me to hyperventilate, to reach for my checkbook with trembling hands, to promise her the world just to keep my precious Leo in my life. Instead, I pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim, atmospheric lighting of the restaurant. "Who are you texting?" Chloe snapped, her voice losing its faux sweetness, a sharp edge of genuine panic suddenly bleeding into her tone. "Did you hear what I just said, Eleanor? 3,000, or you are dead to us." I didn't look up. I swiped past my banking app, past the notification confirming the 8-figure deposit that could have bought their entire neighborhood and paved it into a parking lot. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to a number saved simply under the initials MV, the managing partner of the most ruthless, devastatingly effective wealth management and asset recovery law firm on the Eastern Seaboard. A man whose hourly rate could bankrupt my daughter-in-law in an afternoon. I tapped the screen, raising the phone to my ear. I finally looked up, locking eyes with Chloe. My gaze was so cold, so entirely devoid of the motherly warmth she had exploited for a decade, that she physically shrank back into the plush leather of the restaurant booth. The line rang once, twice. Then, a sharp, professional voice answered. "Eleanor, it's late. Is everything all right?" "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth as aged whiskey, carrying effortlessly across the quiet table. "I need you to initiate Protocol 0 on the primary trust. Yes, the one attached to the deed of the house David and Chloe currently reside in. The house I own. I also need you to freeze the secondary emergency credit lines immediately. And Marcus, call the repo agency. Let them know the lease on the Range Rover is officially terminated due to non-payment from the primary driver. I lowered the phone slightly, holding Chloe's horrified, widening eyes as the color drained completely from her aggressively contoured face. "I'm going to need them removed from my properties by morning," I whispered, smiling a smile that promised absolute, unmitigated destruction. All of them. The ambient, sophisticated hum of Laura seemed to instantly evaporate into a dead, ringing silence. If you could have paused time in that exact, microscopic fraction of a second, you would have seen the precise moment the arrogant, entitlement-fueled light behind Chloe's eyes violently flickered and died, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a parasite realizing it has just severed its only lifeline. But before we watch the absolute, systematic, and entirely legal destruction of my daughter-in-law's pristine, fake wealth facade, before we witness the glorious, devastating arrival of the repo men at her manicured suburban estate, I need to pause this story. I need to step out of that private dining room, look directly at you through this screen, and ask you a profoundly important question. Where are you watching this from today? Drop your city, your state, or your country down in the comments below right now. Are you watching this on your phone during your lunch break? Hiding in your car just to get 30 minutes of absolute peace away from demanding relatives? Are you lying in bed late at night, unable to sleep because your stomach is tied in agonizing knots over an upcoming family holiday that you already know is going to be a psychological war zone? Or are you sitting in your own quiet, beautiful, hard-earned home, a sanctuary you built with your own two hands, finally free from the toxic noise of the people who used to drag you down? Let me know where you are tuning in from because I want to see the global map of survivors we are building here today. And before I continue this story, I need you to do something else for me. I need you to hit that like button, and I need you to smash that subscribe button if you have ever, even once in your life, been forced to sit across a table and smile politely while a toxic family member looked at you like you were nothing more than a personal ATM. Hit subscribe if you know the excruciating, suffocating weight of being the responsible one. The one who is always expected to swallow their pride, bite their tongue, and pull out their wallet to fix the catastrophic mistakes of relatives who refuse to take accountability for their own lives. Hit that like button if you have ever had your love, your empathy, or your connection to a child utterly weaponized against you by a narcissist trying to extort you for their own selfish gain. Society feeds us this incredibly dangerous, romanticized lie from the moment we are born. We are told repeatedly and aggressively that family is everything. We are conditioned to believe that sharing a bloodline or a marriage certificate is an automatic, non-negotiable blank check for endless disrespect, endless financial bailouts, and endless emotional abuse. They tell you to be the bigger person. They tell you to keep the peace. They tell you to forgive and forget. Because, after all, they are family. But what they don't tell you is that keeping the peace for a toxic family member usually requires declaring a total and complete war on yourself. For years, I was exactly where so many of you might be right now. I was trapped in the exhausting cycle of the scapegoat and the golden child. I watched my son David morph from a bright, capable young man into a cowardly, spineless extension of his wife's bottomless greed. I allowed myself to be financially bled dry, covering their emergencies, their lifestyle upgrades, and their endless series of manufactured crises, all because I was terrified of losing the only pure thing left in my life. My grandson, Leo. Chloe knew that. Toxic people always know your weak spots. They possess a predatory, almost supernatural ability to identify the exact thing you love most in this world, and they will not hesitate to hold it hostage. Give me $3,000 a month, or you will never see him again. It is the ultimate cruelty. It is emotional terrorism disguised as a family dynamic. But here is the beautiful, liberating, and absolutely devastating truth that narcissists like Chloe completely fail to comprehend. When you push a good, patient, giving person to the absolute edge of their sanity, when you finally back them into a corner and threaten the core of their soul, you do not break them. You forge them. You strip away their societal conditioning. You evaporate their guilt. And you awaken a sleeping giant that will burn your entire fraudulent kingdom to the ground without blinking an eye. In that private alcove, I didn't just find my voice. I found my ultimate power. I realized that my wealth, my hard work, and my absolute financial independence were not tools for their convenience. They were the instruments of my liberation. We are building a community here of people who refuse to be victims anymore. A community of individuals who are auditing their lives, identifying the emotional vampires, and cutting the cords without a single drop of remorse. If you are ready to stop being the silent workhorse for someone else's dysfunction, if you are ready to reclaim your peace, your portfolio, and your power, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because when we go back into that restaurant, I am going to show you exactly what happens when you finally stop playing defense, pick up the phone, and execute a masterclass in nuclear, unapologetic boundaries. You are going to want to hear every single detail of the fallout when the bank calls, the tow trucks arrive, and the illusion of my daughter-in-law's perfect life is shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. To truly understand the seismic, earth-shattering magnitude of what was about to happen to my daughter-in-law, you have to understand the agonizing, decade-long psychological war of attrition that led us to that private dining alcove at Laura. There is a distinct, deeply intoxicating aura to real, generational, quiet wealth. It doesn't need to announce itself when it walks into a room. It doesn't need to flash oversized designer logos or scream at valets to prove its importance. True wealth whispers. It is found in the flawless, custom tailoring of an unbranded wool coat, the subtle ticking of a vintage Patek Philippe watch, and the absolute, unshakable calm of a person who knows they can buy and sell the entire building they are standing in. I understood this intimately, because for the last 25 years, I had lived a deliberate, meticulously crafted double life. When my husband Richard passed away from a sudden, aggressive heart attack in our early 30s, my entire universe collapsed into a terrifying abyss of grief and suffocating debt. I was a young widow with a 10-year-old son, a heavily mortgaged starter home, and exactly $400 in my checking account. I remember sitting on the cold linoleum floor of our tiny kitchen at 3 a.m, clutching a stack of final notice medical bills and making a silent, unbreakable vow to the empty room. I swore, with every fiber of my being, that I would never be vulnerable again. I swore that my son David would never know the cold, biting panic of poverty. So I went to work. I didn't just climb the corporate ladder. I built an elevator, stepped inside, and smashed the glass ceiling to absolute pieces. I started as a low-level analyst at a fledgling supply chain logistics firm. I worked 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks. I ate stale vending machine sandwiches at my desk under flickering fluorescent lights, while my male colleagues went out for 3 martini lunches. I outworked, outsmarted, and outmaneuvered every single executive in that building. Over 2 decades, I became the indispensable architect of their global expansion. When the company eventually went public and subsequently merged with a massive international conglomerate, my equity shares and deferred compensation packages quietly vested into a fortune that most people cannot even begin to comprehend. But I never changed my lifestyle. I stayed in the same modest 3-bedroom suburban home Richard and I had bought together. I drove a reliable mid-priced sedan. I wore tasteful off-the-rack clothing. I wanted David to grow up grounded. I wanted him to understand the value of $1, the dignity of hard work, and the importance of character over cash. For a long time it worked. He graduated from a solid state university, landed a respectable middle management job at a software firm, and was a kind, empathetic young man. And then he met Chloe. If true wealth whispers, Chloe was a shrieking car alarm in a library. She was the absolute textbook definition of fake, desperate, heavily leveraged status chasing. Chloe came from a fiercely arrogant lower-middle-class family who spent every dime they ever earned trying to project the illusion of aristocracy. She was raised by a mother who taught her that a woman's worth was entirely determined by the zip code of her husband and the carat weight of her engagement ring. From the very first night David brought her over for dinner, I saw the mask slipping. I watched her perfectly manicured eyes scan my living room, cataloging the worn edges of my comfortable sofa, the older model television, and the simple, unpretentious dining set. I saw the imperceptible sneer of disappointment cross her heavily contoured face. She had pegged me instantly. To Chloe, I was just a tired, painfully average middle-class widow. I was a nobody. And because I was a nobody, she immediately decided I was beneath her respect, but entirely useful for her endless parasitic consumption. The transformation of my son was agonizing to watch. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash that spanned over a decade. Chloe didn't just want David's love. She wanted complete, unquestioning submission to her superficial delusions. Within a year of their marriage, David's gentle nature was completely eroded, replaced by a frantic, sweaty desperation to keep his demanding wife happy. First, it was the wedding. A quiet, elegant ceremony wasn't enough. Chloe demanded a massive, heavily orchestrated spectacle at a historic country club that cost more than David's annual salary. When his credit was maxed out, he came to me, eyes cast down to the floor, begging for a small loan to cover the floral arrangements and the premium open bar. I paid it, dipping into a tiny fraction of my vast, hidden liquid assets, telling them I had taken out a second mortgage to make it happen. I wanted to see if they would show any gratitude. Chloe didn't even send me a thank you card. At the reception, she seated me at a drafty table near the kitchen doors, far away from her own family, as if my modest dress and quiet demeanor would somehow infect her VIP guests with the stench of the middle class. Then came the house. A perfectly beautiful starter home in a safe neighborhood was violently rejected. "I cannot raise a family in a split level, Eleanor," Chloe had scoffed over a forced Sunday brunch, practically gagging on her mimosa. "It's embarrassing. What will my friends think?" So they leased, a massive, poorly constructed, faux Tuscan McMansion in an aggressively gated community. It had towering, ridiculous columns that served no structural purpose, a sterile, aggressively staged white living room that looked like a furniture showroom, and a mortgage payment that was mathematically impossible for David to sustain. It was an absolute monument to financial illiteracy. When they inevitably fell 3 months behind on their payments, facing total foreclosure and public humiliation, David came crying to me again. That was the moment I made my most strategic move. Through a blind, heavily encrypted LLC managed by my attorney Marcus, I quietly bought the house from the bank in a cash foreclosure sale. I then rented it back to David and Chloe at a steeply discounted rate. Chloe, of course, had no idea. She thought they had miraculously refinanced. She thought she was the queen of her little suburban castle, completely unaware that she was sleeping under a roof owned entirely, legally, and permanently by the pathetic, boring mother-in-law she openly despised. As the years ground on, the financial abuse mutated into psychological torture. I became their personal ATM, heavily disguised as a loving grandmother. Every time I visited, Chloe made sure to remind me of my place in her hierarchy. "Oh, Eleanor, careful with that vase, it's imported," she would snap if I walked too close to the entryway table. "It cost more than your car." "I'd invite you to the country club for Mother's Day," she would sigh, examining her acrylic nails. "But they have a very strict dress code, and I know you don't really have anything appropriate." I swallowed the insults. I smiled through the backhanded compliments. I let her parade around in the designer shoes and the leased Range Rover that my money was secretly subsidizing. I endured it all because of Leo, my beautiful, innocent grandson. When Leo was born, Chloe discovered the ultimate weapon. She realized, with terrifying, predatory speed, that I would walk through fire for that little boy. And so, the extortion began. The demands were never framed as requests. They were framed as hostages. If David's credit card was maxed out and they couldn't afford their extravagant summer vacation, Chloe would casually mention that they might have to cancel my weekend visits with Leo because the financial stress in the house is just too toxic for the baby right now. If she wanted a $2,000 purebred French bulldog that she would eventually ignore, she heavily implied that Leo would be devastated if Grandma didn't help Santa get it for him. She effectively placed a toll booth on my relationship with my own flesh and blood. Every hug, every bedtime story, every afternoon at the park with Leo had a price tag attached to it. And my son, my cowardly, thoroughly broken son, just stood by and let it happen. He allowed his mother to be bled dry and disrespected in her own family because it was easier than facing the wrath of his manic, status-obsessed wife. They thought I was weak. They mistook my profound, calculated silence for stupidity. They thought that because I wore practical shoes and drove a 6-year-old Honda, I was a helpless pensioner, desperately clinging to the scraps of affection they threw my way. They had absolutely no idea that every time I wrote a check, every time I covered a forgotten utility bill, and every time I paid for Leo's absurdly expensive private kindergarten, my attorney was meticulously documenting it. Every single transaction was quietly logged, legally formalized, and attached as a lien to the trust that held their precious, fake wealth lifestyle together. I was not being played. I was building an airtight, impenetrable fortress of legal leverage. For 10 years, I had gathered the kindling, carefully stacking every insult, every extortion attempt, and every display of gross entitlement into a massive, highly combustible pile. And now, sitting in the private alcove of Laura, listening to Chloe demand $3,000 a month from what she believed was a meager state pension, she had just handed me the match. The era of the silent, suffering matriarch was officially dead. The era of absolute, scorched earth corporate justice had arrived. The silence in the private dining alcove of Laura was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a bomb detonation, where the dust hasn't quite settled, but the structural damage is undeniably catastrophic. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, nobody moved. The string quartet playing out in the main dining room felt a million miles away. entirely disconnected from the slaughter that was currently unfolding across our starched white tablecloth. Chloe's perfectly manicured hands were trembling. She tried to hide it by gripping the stem of her crystal wine glass, but the dark red liquid sloshed violently against the pristine rim. She forced a laugh, a high-pitched, brittle, intensely desperate sound that died almost instantly in her throat. "You are psychotic," she scoffed, though her voice completely lacked its usual venomous bite. She looked at David, desperately seeking backup, but my son was staring at me with a look of pale, unadulterated horror. Chloe turned her aggressively contoured face back to me, trying to summon a sneer. "You don't own our house, Eleanor. We have a mortgage. We pay Vanguard Trust every single month. You're a retired administrative assistant. You drive a Honda. You can't just... You call some fake lawyer and pretend you're kicking us out to scare me." I reached for my linen napkin, delicately dabbing the corners of my mouth before folding it and placing it deliberately beside my untouched truffle risotto. "Vanguard Trust," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet commanding the space with the gravity of a seasoned CEO addressing a deeply incompetent intern. "Vanguard Trust is a blind, limited liability corporation registered in the state of Delaware. Its primary function is asset management and real estate holding. Its sole proprietor, majority shareholder, and exclusive beneficiary..." I leaned forward, letting the soft amber lighting of the crystal chandelier illuminate the cold, dead certainty in my eyes. "Is me." I watched the exact moment her brain tried to process the mathematical impossibility of her reality. I watched the fake wealth facade she had spent 10 years aggressively maintaining begin to crack, splinter, and disintegrate right in front of my eyes. "Every single time you refinanced your mortgage because David couldn't afford your shopping sprees?" I continued, my tone smooth, clinical, and devoid of any maternal warmth. "You were signing a new lease agreement with my holding company. I own the faux Tuscan pillars you love so much. I own the aggressively white living room. I own the ground it sits on. And as of that phone call to Marcus, your lease has been unilaterally terminated for hostile behavior toward the landlord." "Mom, please," David finally croaked, his voice cracking like a terrified adolescent. He reached across the table, his hand shaking. You can't be serious. Where did you get that kind of money? Mom, she was just stressed. She didn't mean the thing about Leo. Please, you can't do this to us. We'll be homeless." I did not reach out to take his hand. I simply stared at it until he slowly, shamefully pulled it back. "Do not insult my intelligence, David," I said, the absolute icy disgust in my voice cutting him to the bone. "I sat at this table and watched your wife extort me. I watched her threaten to take away the only grandchild I have, treating my love for him as a financial vulnerability to be exploited. And you sat there, adjusting your cuffs, and let her do it for $3,000. I picked up my smartphone again, tapping the screen to awaken it. I opened my encrypted banking application, authenticated it with my biometric scan, and slid the phone across the smooth mahogany table. It stopped, perfectly centered between David and Chloe. "You see, Chloe," I said, leaning back into the plush leather of the booth, completely relaxed, a sovereign queen observing the ruins of a conquered kingdom. "You always assumed I was just a tired, middle-class widow clinging to a meager state pension. You assumed I was an easy mark, because I didn't feel the need to broadcast my net worth with leased cars and tacky, oversized designer logos." Chloe's eyes darted down to the glowing screen of the phone. David leaned in. There, in bold, undeniable black and white, was the available balance of my primary liquid checking account. It wasn't a modest sum. It was an 8-figure balance. A number so large, so incomprehensibly massive, that it possessed two commas. $45,212,000. Chloe physically recoiled, gasping as if the phone had just struck her across the face. All the blood drained from her meticulously made-up cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under harsh lights. I wasn't a secretary at Apex Logistics, I stated calmly, driving the final, lethal nail into her coffin of arrogance. I was the founding architect of their eastern expansion. I brokered their global merger. Today wasn't the payout of a state pension. Today was the final liquidation of my majority founder's shares. I watched Chloe's mouth open and close, resembling a suffocating fish pulled from a polluted river. The arrogant, untouchable daughter-in-law who had bullied me, belittled my home, and treated me like a peasant had just realized she had been mercilessly biting the hand that secretly owned her entire world. "You wanted $3,000 a month?" I asked, a bitter, triumphant smile finally touching my lips. "I could have bought your entire neighborhood this morning and bulldozed it for fun." I was prepared to set up a generational trust for Leo that would have ensured neither of you ever had to work another day in your miserable, shallow lives. I reached out and calmly pulled my phone back, sliding it effortlessly into my leather handbag. "But you couldn't help yourself," I whispered, the finality of my words ringing like a death knell in the quiet room. "You got greedy. You got cruel. And in doing so, you just successfully extorted yourself out of a $50 million empire." The air in the private dining alcove was no longer just silent. It had become a pressurized vacuum, aggressively sucking the oxygen straight out of my son's lungs. David stared at the empty space on the polished mahogany table where my phone had rested just moments before, his eyes wide, unblinking, and entirely hollow. He looked like a man who had just watched a devastating hurricane wipe his entire reality off the map, leaving absolutely nothing but splintered wood and shattered glass in its wake. Chloe, on the other hand, was rapidly cycling through the 5 stages of grief, though she seemed entirely stuck between blistering denial and sheer, unadulterated panic. The arrogant, untouchable queen of the suburbs, who just 5 minutes ago had threatened to erase me from my grandson's life over a $3,000 monthly extortion fee, was currently hyperventilating. Her chest heaved dramatically under her expensive, dry-clean-only silk blouse. "This is a trick," Chloe finally stammered, her voice completely stripped of its usual condescending, syrupy sweetness. It was now a harsh, jagged rasp, like sandpaper dragging across exposed nerve endings. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her impeccably manicured acrylic nails shaking violently. "This is some kind of sick, twisted trick, Eleanor. You do not have $50 million. You buy your clothes off the clearance rack. You drive a car that smells like cheap air freshener. People with that kind of money do not live like you." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I remained perfectly still, a monument of absolute, terrifying composure amidst her pathetic meltdown. "People with that kind of money, Chloe," I said, my tone smooth, clinical, and devastatingly calm, "do not feel the desperate need to prove it to people like you. Real wealth does not scream for validation from strangers at the country club. Real wealth is silent. It is secure. It is the power to sit across from a parasite, let them dig their own grave, and then casually hand them the headstone. I gave you every opportunity to be a decent human being. I gave you 10 years to show even a singular ounce of genuine gratitude or respect. Instead, you chose extortion. You chose cruelty. And now you get to experience the absolute, unmitigated consequences of those choices." David suddenly jolted to life, the sheer terror finally bypassing his shock and hijacking his central nervous system. He leaned over the table, his elbows knocking aggressively against his untouched plate of imported caviar and blinis. The custom Italian wool suit I had purchased for his birthday, a suit he wore like armor to project the illusion of a successful man, suddenly looked 3 sizes too big on his shrinking, cowardly frame. "Mom, please," he begged, his voice cracking, a high-pitched, desperate whine slipping past his lips. Tears, genuine tears of absolute panic began to well up in the corners of his eyes. "You can't do this. You're our mother. You're Leo's grandmother. You can't just evict us. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? You're angry. I get it. She went too far. Chloe, tell her you went too far." He turned to his wife, frantically grabbing her arm, but Chloe aggressively yanked it away, her eyes wild, darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit that did not exist. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my absolute sanity to protect. In that precise, microscopic moment, any lingering trace of maternal guilt completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard clarity of a corporate titan observing a severely underperforming asset. "Do not dare use that word with me, David," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with the authority of an absolute monarch. The steel in my tone instantly snapped his mouth shut. "I ceased being your mother the exact second you sat there, adjusting your overpriced cuffs, and allowed that woman to hold my access to my grandson hostage for a monthly ransom. You are not a son. You are an accomplice, and as of tonight, I am not your mother. I am your landlord, and you are being evicted for cause." Chloe's hands flew to her designer handbag. She ripped it open, her fingers frantically clawing past her expensive cosmetics and gold-plated compacts until she pulled out her own smartphone. Her hands were shaking so violently she dropped the device twice onto the thick, plush carpet before finally managing to unlock the screen. "David, check the accounts," she ordered, her voice shrill, bordering on completely hysterical. "Check the joint checking, check the Vanguard portal. She's bluffing. She has to be bluffing." I watched her with a detached, almost clinical fascination. I reached for my crystal goblet, raising the $200 Cabernet to my lips, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was robust, complex, and tasted absolutely, undeniably like victory. "I wouldn't bother, Chloe," I stated smoothly, setting the glass down with a delicate clink that echoed sharply in the silent room. When Marcus initiated Protocol Zero, it wasn't just a suggestion. Your secondary credit lines, the ones attached to my umbrella policy that you've been secretly using to fund your luxury spa weekends and imported dog breeders, were frozen exactly 3 minutes ago. Your joint checking account, which was tethered to the emergency reserve I set up for David, has been completely severed and zeroed out to recover the fraudulent charges you made last month. Chloe gasped, staring at her phone screen as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. The harsh blue light illuminated the stark, undeniable reality displayed on her banking app. "Declined," she whispered, her voice cracking, the color draining from her face so completely she looked almost translucent. "It says, access denied, account suspended." "Oh, God," David moaned, burying his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, pathetic sobs. "Oh my God, it's all gone. She took it all." "I didn't take anything that belonged to you, David," I corrected him sharply, my words cutting through his self-pity like a surgical scalpel. "I simply stopped providing the oxygen to your delusions. You are a 34-year-old man making $80,000 a year, living a $300,000 lifestyle. The math has finally caught up to you. The Bank of Eleanor is permanently, irrevocably closed. Before Chloe could unleash whatever venomous, desperate tirade was currently boiling in her throat, the heavy oak doors of our private dining alcove slowly creaked open. Standing in the threshold was Henri, the notoriously strict, impeccably dressed maitre d' of Laura. He was a man who usually moved through the restaurant with the silent, invisible grace of a ghost, ensuring the city's elite were never disturbed. But right now, his usually composed face was tight with extreme discomfort. He cleared his throat softly, his eyes darting between the three of us, desperately trying to assess the radioactive tension radiating from our table. "I offer my most profound apologies for the interruption, Madame Vance," Henri said, addressing me with a deep, respectful nod, knowing exactly whose name was on the reservation and the black, ultra-exclusive credit card holding the table. He then turned his gaze toward David, his expression hardening slightly. "Is there a Mr. David Vance present?" David slowly raised his head from his hands, his eyes red and puffy, looking like a deer caught in the blinding high beams of an oncoming semi-truck. "Yes," he croaked. Henry stood up straighter, adjusting the lapels of his tuxedo. "Sir, I have been asked to inform you that there is a situation in the valet staging area. A rather large, heavy-duty commercial towing vehicle has just blocked the primary entrance. The driver is in possession of a court-ordered repossession mandate for a 2024 Land Rover Range Rover, license plate." Henry glanced down at a small silver notepad in his hand. "VANCE-1. He is demanding the immediate surrender of the electronic key fob, or he will forcefully drag the vehicle onto the flatbed." The silence that followed Henri's announcement was so profound it felt heavy, pressing down on the room like a physical weight. Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She leaped up from the plush leather booth, her chair scraping violently against the floorboards. "No!" she screamed, all pretenses of high society elegance completely evaporating, replaced by the raw, unfiltered panic of a cornered fraud. "No, no, no! That is my car! That is my vehicle! You cannot take it! Henri, tell them to leave immediately! Tell them you will call the police!" Henry did not flinch. He looked at Chloe with the polite, icy disdain reserved for those who broke the cardinal rule of Laura. Never make a scene. "Madame, the gentleman has legitimate legal paperwork. The local authorities are already present to ensure a peaceful transfer of the asset. They have requested your presence outside. Immediately." I stood up slowly, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my practical, dark navy slacks. I picked up my leather handbag and walked calmly toward the far corner of the alcove, completely ignoring the absolute meltdown happening at the table. Leo was still sitting on the velvet settee, oblivious to the fact that his entire financial universe had just imploded. He was happily humming a little song, pushing his die-cast fire truck along the baseboards. I knelt down, my joints popping slightly, and offered him a warm, genuine smile. The first real smile I had worn all evening. "Hey there, sweet boy," I said softly, keeping my voice gentle and bright. "Are you ready to go for a little walk with Grandma? The grown-ups are going to be a little loud for a minute." Leo looked up, his bright, innocent eyes shining. He dropped the fire truck into his pocket and eagerly reached out, wrapping his small, warm hand securely around my fingers. "Are we going to see the big trucks outside, Grandma?" "We sure are, sweetheart," I whispered, standing up and pulling him gently to my side, shielding him from the view of his hyperventilating mother and weeping father. "We are going to see a very, very big truck." I turned back to the table. Chloe was frantically digging through her designer purse, her makeup completely ruined, dark streaks of expensive mascara running down her flushed cheeks. David was completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the wall. "Shall we?" I asked, gesturing gracefully toward the door. The walk from the private alcove, through the main dining room, and out to the front entrance of Lara was a masterclass in public, slow-motion humiliation. As we stepped out of the secluded room, Chloe was still frantically whispering to David, violently shaking his arm, demanding he do something, fix this, call someone. But David was a ghost. He shuffled forward, his head down, entirely defeated. The main dining room was packed with the city's absolute upper crust. CEOs, politicians, generational heirs, and elite socialites. These were the exact people Chloe had spent her entire adult life trying to impress, emulate, and infiltrate. As our bizarre procession moved through the room, me, calmly holding my grandson's hand, followed by a weeping man and a frantic, disheveled woman, the soft hum of aristocratic conversation slowly died out. Heads turned. Crystal glasses were lowered. Eyes, sharp and judgmental, locked onto Chloe. The whispers began immediately, hissing through the room like a lit fuse. Chloe tried to keep her chin up, tried to project an air of indignant superiority, but the sheer panic radiating from her pores was impossible to hide. She was being publicly marched to the gallows of her own social execution, and every single person in that room knew it. When we finally pushed through the heavy brass and glass front doors of the restaurant, the crisp, cool night air hit us, bringing with it the harsh, undeniable reality of the situation. There, blocking the pristine, circular valet driveway of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, was a massive, hulking, aggressively yellow commercial tow truck. Its heavy diesel engine idled loudly, a deep, rhythmic growl that vibrated in the pavement beneath our feet. Bright amber strobe lights flashed rhythmically on top of the cab, casting harsh, alternating shadows across the manicured landscaping and the shocked faces of the valet staff. And hooked to the heavy steel chains at the back of the flatbed, its rear tires already suspended 2 feet in the air, was Chloe's pristine, white 2024 Range Rover. A burly man in a high-visibility jacket was standing near the hydraulic controls, holding a clipboard. 2 uniformed city police officers stood a few feet away, their arms crossed, watching the scene with bored, professional detachment. "Stop!" Chloe shrieked, sprinting past the valets, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the cobblestone driveway. She threw herself toward the tow truck driver, waving her arms wildly. "Put it down! Put it down right now! This is a mistake! My husband is paying for this car! David, tell him!" The tow truck driver didn't even blink. He looked down at his clipboard, then looked at Chloe's tear-streaked face. "Name," he grunted, completely unbothered by her hysterics. "Chloe Vance!" she screamed. "And you are making a massive, illegal mistake. I will sue you. I will sue your entire company. Unhook my vehicle immediately." The driver pulled a pen from behind his ear and tapped it against the paperwork. "Vance, yeah. Lien holder is Vanguard Trust, LLC. Account is 90 days in default. Lease agreement unilaterally terminated by the primary stakeholder at 9:07 p.m. tonight. I need the key fob, lady. You can hand it over, or I can mark it as hostile recovery and drag it onto the bed with the brakes locked. Your call, but it's leaving this driveway either way." Chloe whipped around, her eyes wide and bloodshot, searching the crowd of onlookers that had begun to gather near the restaurant's entrance. The elite patrons, drawn by the commotion and the flashing lights, were now standing on the marble steps, watching the spectacle with a mixture of shock and sheer, unfiltered entertainment. "I'll pay it!" Chloe yelled desperately, digging into her purse again. She pulled out a stack of pristine metallic credit cards, the very cards Marcus had frozen just minutes ago. "I'll pay the arrears right now! How much is it? 5,000? 10,000? Here!" She shoved a silver card toward the driver. The man sighed, pulling a portable cellular card reader from his utility belt. He swiped the card. The machine beeped once. a harsh, negative tone. "Declined," the driver said flatly. Chloe gasped. "Try this one. It's an executive platinum." She shoved a black card into his hand. He swiped it. Beep. Declined. Card reported as frozen by the issuing bank. No, that's impossible! Chloe was hyperventilating now, spinning around to face the crowd. She locked eyes with a woman she recognized, a wealthy socialite she had spent months trying to court for a country club sponsorship. The woman looked back at Chloe with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, slowly shaking her head before turning and walking back into the restaurant. Chloe's social standing didn't just crumble in that moment. It was vaporized. The illusion was dead. Everyone saw her for exactly what she was, a heavily indebted, fraudulent imposter throwing a temper tantrum over a car she didn't own. I stood on the sidewalk, keeping a firm, reassuring grip on Leo's hand. He was watching the flashing lights with wide-eyed fascination, completely shielded from the malice of the moment by his own innocence. David finally stumbled out of the restaurant doors, looking like a man walking to his own funeral. He didn't look at his wife. He didn't look at the car. He walked straight toward me, his shoulders slumped, his spirit entirely broken. "Mom," he whispered, his voice completely devoid of life. "Please, I'm begging you. If you take the house, if you take the car, we have nothing. We have absolutely nothing." I looked at my son, feeling a profound, quiet sorrow for the weak man he had chosen to become. But sorrow did not equate to mercy. "You have exactly what you built, David," I replied, my voice steady, carrying over the loud hum of the diesel engine. "You built a life on a foundation of lies, funded by my silent sacrifices and maintained by your wife's cruel extortion. You allowed her to weaponize my grandson. You allowed her to threaten the one thing that brought me joy, just so you wouldn't have to face the reality of your own failures." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. It had the heavy, embossed logo of Marcus's law firm stamped in the corner. I pressed it firmly into David's chest until his trembling hands automatically came up to take it. What is this?" he stammered, looking down at the heavy parchment. "That is a formal notice of eviction, a termination of all financial support, and a preliminary custody and visitation injunction filed by the most ruthless family law firm in this state," I stated, my words cutting through the cool night air with absolute precision. "You see, David, when you have $50 million, you don't just hire a lawyer. You hire a legal armada. The trust I set up for Leo, it is ironclad. Neither you nor your wife will ever be able to touch a single penny of it. It will pay for his education, his health, and his future. But you will not see a dime." Chloe, having finally given up on the tow truck driver, stormed over, her face twisted in a mask of pure, desperate rage. She pointed a finger inches from my face. "You think you can just buy my son?" she screamed, her voice completely hoarse. "You think you can just take him from me? I am his mother. I will take you to court. I will drag you through the mud. I will make sure you never see him again." I didn't blink. I didn't step back. I leaned in slightly, closing the distance, letting her see the absolute, terrifying void in my eyes where my patience used to live. "Take me to court, Chloe," I whispered, my voice dripping with toxic, lethal calm. "Please, do it. Bring your public defender to face my $500 an hour legal team. Let a judge look at your zeroed-out bank accounts, your foreclosed home, your repossessed vehicle, and your documented history of financial instability. Let them look at the massive, legally binding paper trail of extortion and emotional abuse I have meticulously collected over the last 10 years. I paused, letting the reality of her total, inescapable defeat wash over her. I watched her eyes widen as the sheer, insurmountable cliff face of my power finally became visible to her. "If you ever try to keep my grandson away from me," I continued, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen, "I will not just bury you in litigation. I will financially ruin you so completely that you will not be able to afford a bus ticket out of this city, let alone a lawyer. You will drop Leo off at my house every other weekend, exactly as Marcus has outlined in that envelope. You will smile when you do it, and you will never, ever ask me for another dime as long as you both draw breath. Do we understand each other?" Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by the hollow, shattered realization of total surrender. She slowly lowered her hand, stepping back, her entire body visibly trembling. I turned my back on them. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer a final word of comfort to the son who had betrayed me. I looked down at Leo, offering him a warm, bright smile. "All right, my brave boy," I said, gently squeezing his hand. "Let's go home. I think Grandma has some ice cream waiting for us." "Can we ride in your car?" Leo asked, his voice bright and unaffected by the destruction around him. "We absolutely can," I replied. I raised my hand, signaling the valet. A young man, wide-eyed from witnessing the entire spectacle, immediately sprinted toward the secure parking area. Within seconds, my quiet, reliable, unassuming Honda sedan pulled smoothly into the driveway, right behind the tow truck that was now securing the chains on Chloe's fake wealth chariot. I opened the back door, securing Leo safely in his car seat. I closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and slid into the leather seat. I started the engine, the quiet, familiar purr of the motor, a stark contrast to the loud, aggressive rumble of the tow truck in front of me. The drive away from the sprawling, manicured estate of Lara was the quietest, most profoundly beautiful journey of my entire life. As I navigated my unassuming 6-year-old Honda sedan through the winding, tree-lined avenues of the city's elite district, the aggressive, flashing amber lights of the massive commercial tow truck slowly faded from my rear-view mirror, eventually disappearing entirely into the cool, dark ink of the night. In the back seat, safely buckled into his booster seat, Leo was already fast asleep. His small chest rose and fell in a slow, peaceful rhythm, his tiny fingers still loosely clutching the little die-cast fire truck he had been playing with in the restaurant. He had absolutely no idea that the world as he knew it had just undergone a massive tectonic shift. He didn't know that the fragile, toxic, debt-ridden empire his parents had built on the foundation of his grandmother's silent suffering had just collapsed into a pile of worthless rubble. All he knew was that he was safe, he was warm, and he was loved. And as I glanced at his sweet, sleeping face in the rearview mirror, an immense, overwhelming wave of physical relief washed over my entire body. It was a sensation so visceral, so entirely undeniable, that I could actually feel the decades of accumulated stress, anxiety, and manufactured maternal guilt physically evaporating from my bones. The chronic tightness in my chest, a heavy, suffocating knot that I had carried every single day since David married Chloe, was simply gone. It had been replaced by the crisp, clean, intoxicating oxygen of absolute sovereignty. For the first time in 10 years, I was no longer a hostage in my own life. I want to take this moment to step away from the steering wheel, look directly at you through this screen, and talk about the absolute, devastating reality of what just happened. Because what you just witnessed was not merely a story about a hidden bank account, a repossessed luxury vehicle, or a dramatic restaurant eviction. It was a story about the ultimate, most agonizing psychological boundary a human being ever has to draw. For generations, society has aggressively force-fed us a deeply toxic, incredibly dangerous narrative. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to believe that sharing a bloodline, a last name, or a marriage certificate automatically grants someone an irrevocable, unlimited blank check to your soul. We are told that family is everything. We are bombarded with empty platitudes telling us to be the bigger person, to keep the peace, to forgive and forget, and to turn the other cheek, no matter how violently or repeatedly that cheek is struck. But here is the absolute, unvarnished truth that abusers, manipulators, and narcissists are utterly terrified of you discovering. Blood does not equal a blank check. Sharing DNA with someone does not magically exempt them from the basic, fundamental rules of human decency, respect, and mutual reciprocity. Being a mother, a father, a sister, or a grandmother does not mean you are legally or morally obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. It does not mean you are required to function as an emotional punching bag or a bottomless financial ATM for adults who violently refuse to take accountability for their own choices, their own greed, and their own fabricated realities. What my daughter-in-law Chloe did not understand, what she fundamentally failed to grasp in her endless pursuit of fake wealth and superficial dominance, was that true power is not loud. True power does not need to scream at valets, lease cars it cannot afford, or belittle hard-working people to feel important. True power is the quiet, unshakable, deeply internalized knowledge of your own absolute worth. For a decade, I played the role they assigned to me. I was the silent, long-suffering matriarch. I absorbed the disrespect, the backhanded compliments, and the cruel, calculated threats to my relationship with my grandson. All because I was operating under the false, paralyzing belief that enduring abuse was the only way to maintain a connection to my family. I let them weaponize my empathy. I let them hold my love hostage. And I know, with absolute certainty, that there are thousands of you listening to my voice right now who are sitting in that exact same terrifying prison. You are the designated, reliable one. You are the workhorse. You are the one who is expected to silently clean up the catastrophic financial messes, absorb the emotional outbursts, and fund the delusional lifestyles of family members who view you as nothing more than a convenient utility. You sit at holiday dinners biting your tongue until it bleeds, smiling politely while arrogant relatives belittle your home, your career, or your lifestyle, completely unaware that your silent sacrifices are the only thing keeping their entire world from crumbling. They call you selfish when you finally say no. They label you as difficult or crazy when you dare to establish a boundary. They launch aggressive, coordinated smear campaigns against your character, using your guilt, your history, and even your own children or grandchildren as leverage to force you back into submission. But I am here to tell you, from the other side of that suffocating nightmare, that walking away from a toxic family dynamic is not an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate, most profound act of self-preservation you will ever execute. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. You cannot reason with a parasite, and you absolutely cannot satisfy a black hole. When you are dealing with people whose entire existence relies on your subjugation, there is no compromise. There is no middle ground, There is only the continued, agonizing draining of your resources, or the absolute, unapologetic severing of the cord. When I sat in that private alcove at Laura and looked into my son's eyes, I realized something truly devastating. The boy I had raised, the boy I had loved and protected, was gone. He had chosen to be complicit in his wife's cruelty because it was easier than standing up for his own mother. In that microscopic moment of clarity, my grief was completely overshadowed by a cold, calculating instinct to survive. I realized that my wealth, my $45 million portfolio, and my meticulously constructed legal fortresses were entirely useless if I didn't have the courage to actually deploy them. Taking back your power requires you to accept a very harsh reality. You have to be willing to be the villain in their heavily edited, entirely fictional narrative. When you finally cut off the oxygen to a narcissist's delusions, they will scream, they will cry, and they will point the finger at you, blaming you for the collapse of the house of cards they built themselves. Let them. Let them call you selfish. Let them complain to the extended family. Let them cry on the sidewalk outside a luxury restaurant while their leased vehicle is violently dragged onto the back of a repossession truck. Their manufactured crisis is no longer your emergency. Their inability to live within their means, their refusal to show basic human gratitude, and their reliance on emotional extortion are their burdens to carry, not yours. As I drove further into the quiet, peaceful night, a profound sense of catharsis settled deep into my bones. Tomorrow morning, Chloe and David will wake up in a house they do not own, with bank accounts that have been completely zeroed out, and a driveway completely devoid of the luxury vehicle that served as the crown jewel of their fraudulent identity. They will have to face the cold, unyielding consequences of their own unmitigated arrogance. They will have to learn how to survive without the silent, invisible safety net they spent 10 years aggressively taking for granted. And as for me, tomorrow morning, I will wake up in my quiet, modest, entirely paid-for home. I will make a cup of coffee, sit on my porch, and watch the sun rise over a life that belongs entirely, exclusively to me. I will prepare a room for Leo, knowing that the ironclad trust I have established guarantees his future, completely protected from the parasitic greed of his parents. I am not a tired, middle-class widow clinging to a pension. I am the architect of my own absolute freedom. We are building a massive global community here, an army of individuals who are waking up to their own immense power and refusing to be the collateral damage in someone else's dysfunction. I want to hear from you. I want you to flood the comment section right now. Have you ever had to draw a catastrophic line in the sand with a toxic family member? Have you ever had to look an emotional vampire in the eye and permanently close the bank of your time, your money, and your empathy? How did it feel when you finally walked away and let them face the absolute destruction of their own consequences? Share your stories of resilience, your moments of nuclear justice, and your journeys to ultimate peace. Your story, your victory, might be the exact blueprint someone else needs today to finally break their own chains. If my story resonated with you, if you felt that deep, cathartic thrill of watching a bully finally get exactly what they deserve, I need you to hit that like button right now. And more importantly, hit that subscribe button. Join this community of strong, independent, self-made survivors who know that true wealth is not measured by the logos on your clothing, but by the absolute, untouchable peace in your soul. Remember, my friends, your empathy is a gift. Your resources are earned, and your peace of mind is entirely non-negotiable. Never apologize for protecting your empire. The drive away from the sprawling, manicured estate of Laura was the quietest, most profoundly beautiful journey of my entire life. As I navigated my unassuming 6-year-old Honda sedan through the winding, tree-lined avenues of the city's elite district, the aggressive, flashing amber lights of the massive commercial tow truck slowly faded from my rearview mirror, eventually disappearing entirely into the cool, dark ink of the night. In the back seat, safely buckled into his booster seat, Leo was already fast asleep. His small chest rose and fell in a slow, peaceful rhythm, his tiny fingers still loosely clutching the little die-cast fire truck he had been playing with in the restaurant. He had absolutely no idea that the world as he knew it had just undergone a massive tectonic shift. He didn't know that the fragile, toxic, debt-ridden empire his parents had built on the foundation of his grandmother's silent suffering had just collapsed into a pile of worthless rubble. All he knew was that he was safe, he was warm, and he was loved. And as I glanced at his sweet, sleeping face in the rearview mirror, an immense, overwhelming wave of physical relief washed over my entire body. It was a sensation so visceral, so entirely undeniable, that I could actually feel the decades of accumulated stress, anxiety, and manufactured maternal guilt physically evaporating from my bones. The chronic tightness in my chest, a heavy, suffocating knot that I had carried every single day since David married Chloe, was simply gone. It had been replaced by the crisp, clean, intoxicating oxygen of absolute sovereignty. For the first time in 10 years, I was no longer a hostage in my own life. The architecture of peace. I didn't drive us back to the old, modest 3-bedroom house that Chloe despised so much. That house had served its purpose as the perfect camouflage for my wealth, but it was no longer necessary. Instead, I merged onto the private gated coastal highway and drove 45 minutes north, arriving at a set of towering wrought iron gates that opened silently at the signal of my secure fob. We drove up a long, winding driveway bordered by ancient, weeping oak trees, pulling up to my actual home, a breathtaking, ultra-modern glass and cedar sanctuary perched perfectly on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. This was the fortress I had built for myself. No faux Tuscan pillars, no ostentatious, heavily leveraged displays of desperate wealth, just pure, unadulterated architectural serenity, paid for entirely in cash. I carried Leo inside, his head resting heavily on my shoulder, and laid him down in a magnificent, custom-built bedroom overlooking the crashing waves. A room I had designed specifically for him months ago, anticipating the day I would finally pull the trigger on Protocol Zero. I pulled a heavy, weighted gravity blanket over his small shoulders, kissed his forehead, and quietly closed the door. Then I walked into my sprawling, minimalist living room, poured myself a single glass of 20-year-old Macallan Scotch, and stepped out onto the expansive teak balcony. The cold night air whipped around me, smelling of salt and absolute victory. I stood at the edge of the glass railing, looking out into the pitch-black void of the ocean, and I let the profound, earth-shattering reality of my freedom wash over me. The myth of the blank check. I want to take this moment to step away from the balcony, look directly at you through this screen, and talk about the absolute, devastating reality of what you just witnessed. Because what happened tonight was not merely a story about a hidden bank account, a repossessed luxury vehicle, or a dramatic restaurant eviction. It was a story about the ultimate, most agonizing psychological boundary a human being ever has to draw. For generations, society has aggressively force-fed us a deeply toxic, incredibly dangerous narrative. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to believe that sharing a bloodline, a last name, or a marriage certificate automatically grants someone an irrevocable, unlimited blank check to your soul. We are bombarded with empty platitudes telling us to be the bigger person, to keep the peace, to forgive and forget, and to turn the other cheek, no matter how violently or repeatedly that cheek is struck. But here is the absolute, unvarnished truth that abusers, manipulators, and narcissists are utterly terrified of you discovering. Blood does not equal a blank check. Sharing DNA with someone does not magically exempt them from the basic, fundamental rules of human decency, respect, and mutual reciprocity. Being a mother, a father, a sister, or a grandmother does not mean you are legally or morally obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. It does not mean you are required to function as an emotional punching bag or a bottomless financial ATM for adults who violently refuse to take accountability for their own choices, their own greed, and their own fabricated realities. What my daughter-in-law Chloe did not understand, what she fundamentally failed to grasp in her endless pursuit of fake wealth and superficial dominance, was that true power is not loud. True power does not need to scream at valets, lease cars it cannot afford, or belittle hardworking people to feel important. True power is the quiet, unshakable, deeply internalized knowledge of your own absolute worth. The anatomy of the scapegoat. For a decade, I played the role they assigned to me. I was the silent, long-suffering matriarch. I absorbed the disrespect, the backhanded compliments, and the cruel, calculated threats to my relationship with my grandson. All because I was operating under the false, paralyzing belief that enduring abuse was the only way to maintain a connection to my family. I let them weaponize my empathy. I let them hold my love hostage. And I know, with absolute certainty, that there are thousands of you listening to my voice right now who are sitting in that exact same terrifying prison. You are the designated, reliable one. You are the workhorse. You are the one who is expected to silently clean up the catastrophic financial messes, absorb the emotional outbursts, and fund the delusional lifestyles of family members who view you as nothing more than a convenient utility. You sit at holiday dinners biting your tongue until it bleeds, smiling politely while arrogant relatives belittle your home, your career, or your lifestyle, completely unaware that your silent sacrifices are the only thing keeping their entire world from crumbling. They call you selfish when you finally say no. They label you as difficult or crazy when you dare to establish a boundary. They launch aggressive, coordinated smear campaigns against your character, using your guilt, your history, and even your own children or grandchildren as leverage to force you back into submission. But I am here to tell you, from the other side of that suffocating nightmare, that walking away from a toxic family dynamic is not an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate, most profound act of self-preservation you will ever execute. The freedom of the villain era. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. You cannot reason with a parasite, and you absolutely cannot satisfy a black hole. When you are dealing with people whose entire existence relies on your subjugation, there is no compromise. There is no middle ground. There is only the continued, agonizing draining of your resources, or the absolute, unapologetic severing of the cord. When I sat in that private alcove at Laura and looked into my son's eyes, I realized something truly devastating. The boy I had raised, the boy I had loved and protected, was gone. He had chosen to be complicit in his wife's cruelty because it was easier than standing up for his own mother. In that microscopic moment of clarity, my grief was completely overshadowed by a cold, calculating instinct to survive. I realized that my wealth, my $45 million portfolio, and my meticulously constructed legal fortresses were entirely useless if I didn't have the courage to actually deploy them. Taking back your power requires you to accept a very harsh reality. You have to be willing to be the villain in their heavily edited, entirely fictional narrative. When you finally cut off the oxygen to a narcissist's delusions, they will scream, they will cry, and they will point the finger at you, blaming you for the collapse of the house of cards they built themselves. Let them. Let them call you selfish. Let them complain to the extended family. Let them cry on the sidewalk outside a luxury restaurant while their leased vehicle is violently dragged onto the back of a repossession truck. Their manufactured crisis is no longer your emergency. Their inability to live within their means, their refusal to show basic human gratitude, and their reliance on emotional extortion are their burdens to carry, not yours. Tomorrow morning, Chloe and David will wake up in a house they do not own, with bank accounts that have been completely zeroed out, and a driveway completely devoid of the luxury vehicle that served as the crown jewel of their fraudulent identity. They will have to face the cold, unyielding consequences of their own unmitigated arrogance. And as for me, tomorrow morning I will wake up in my quiet, entirely paid-for coastal sanctuary. I will make a cup of coffee, sit on my balcony, and watch the sun rise over a life that belongs entirely, exclusively to me. I am not a tired middle-class widow clinging to a pension. I am the architect of my own absolute freedom. We are building a massive global community here, an army of individuals who are waking up to their own immense power and refusing to be the collateral damage in someone else's dysfunction. I want to hear from you. I want you to flood the comment section right now. Have you ever had to draw a catastrophic line in the sand with a toxic family member? Have you ever had to look an emotional vampire in the eye and permanently close the bank of your time, your money, and your empathy? How did it feel when you finally walked away and let them face the absolute destruction of their own consequences? Share your stories of resilience, your moments of nuclear justice, and your journeys to ultimate peace. Your story, your victory, might be the exact blueprint someone else needs today to finally break their own chains. If my story resonated with you, if you felt that deep, cathartic thrill of watching a bully finally get exactly what they deserve, I need you to hit that like button right now. And more importantly, hit that subscribe button. Join this community of strong, independent, self-made survivors who know that true wealth is not measured by the logos on your clothing, but by the absolute, untouchable peace in your soul. Remember, my friends, your empathy is a gift. Your resources are earned, and your peace of mind is entirely non-negotiable. Never apologize for protecting your empire.